Imagine this. A black man in an expensive suit steps out of a grand courthouse after a long day of justice served. His mind is occupied with thoughts of fairness and equality, values he's devoted his life to. Just as he's about to get into his car, flashing blue and red lights illuminate the street. A white police officer approaches, his hand resting firmly on his holster. "Sir, I need to see your ID," the officer demands. The man pauses, confusion and calm composure mixing on his face. He reaches slowly for his identification, his every move careful under the officer's watchful eye. But what happens next isn't what anyone expects. The conversation takes a tense turn when the cop, unaware of who he's dealing with, lets his assumptions cloud his judgment. He pushes too far, too fast. In a world where appearances can lead to dangerous misunderstandings, this story takes us on a journey through an interaction filled with bias, power, and an unexpected twist. As the tension rises and truths come to light, one man's perspective is about to change forever, and it may just cost him his career. Stay tuned to see how one moment of prejudice turns into a life-altering lesson no one saw coming. The officer's eyes narrow as he examines the man standing calmly before him. He notices the expensive leather briefcase, the tailored suit, and polished shoes, details that don't fit the picture he's already painted in his mind. "Where are you coming from?" the cop asks, his tone sharp and skeptical. From inside, the man responds, gesturing back at the courthouse. "I work here." The officer smirks, clearly unconvinced. Inside, huh? Doing what? The man raises an eyebrow, his patience still intact. "I'm a judge." For a split second, there's silence. The officer blinks, as if the words don't register. He studies the man again, searching for cracks in the story. "A judge, that's a good one. You got anything to prove it?" Without a word, the man reaches into his pocket, slowly pulling out his official identification. He holds it up, his expression calm but resolute. The officer leans in, his eyes darting over the ID card. Reality starts to sink in. But pride is a powerful thing, and instead of apologizing, he straightens up and mutters, "I've got to be careful. You never know these days." The tension lingers in the air. The man's steady gaze never wavers. "Yes," he replies evenly, "you do." A cold wind cuts through the street as the judge slips his ID back into his pocket. He takes a step toward his car, but the officer's hand shoots out to block him. "Hold on," the officer says, his voice lower but still laced with authority. "I'm just doing my job. You looked suspicious." The judge stops, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Suspicious?" he repeats, the weight of the word heavy between them. The officer shifts uncomfortably, but doesn't back down. It's late. A man lingering outside a courthouse, you have to admit, it raises questions. Questions for some more than others, it seems. The judge replies, his tone calm but pointed. There's a beat of silence. Cars pass by in the distance, their headlights flickering across the tense scene. Inside the officer's mind, doubt begins to stir. He knows the protocol. He knows the statistics. But standing here, face to face with someone who clearly belongs, he's beginning to realize the subtle weight of his own assumptions. The judge's voice cuts through his thoughts. "Is there anything else you need from me, officer?" For the first time, the officer hesitates. He's been trained to command authority, to trust his instincts. But what happens when those instincts are wrong? The officer's jaw tightens as he weighs his next move. His hand hovers near his radio, a reflex that feels both familiar and suddenly misplaced. The judge watches him closely, his calm exterior betraying a simmering frustration just beneath the surface. "You seem nervous," the judge says, his voice steady, almost disarming. "Is there something you're not telling me?" The officer stiffens, caught between pride and a growing sense of regret. "I'm just being cautious. You can't be too careful these days." The judge's expression doesn't change, but his words strike with precision. Caution is one thing, profiling is another. For a moment, the street feels frozen in time. The officer blinks, his confidence unraveling as the truth presses in. The silence between them grows heavier, more charged with unspoken realities that neither man can ignore. "You don't even know who I am," the judge continues quietly. "Yet you've assumed I didn't belong. How many others have you treated the same way tonight?" The officer's mouth opens, but no words come. His mind races, replaying the moment he first saw the man and the judgments that followed. He can feel the weight of his badge now, not as a symbol of justice, but as a reminder of the power he has and the responsibility he hasn't always used wisely. The officer finally steps back, giving the judge some space, but the tension between them still crackles like static in the air. He clears his throat, his pride bruised, but his defenses still up. "Look," he mutters, "I've seen things go wrong before. You don't know what it's like out here." The judge's eyes flash with something unreadable sympathy, frustration. "And you don't know what it's like in my courtroom," he replies. "Every day, I see cases where assumptions turn deadly. Every name, every file, is a story that didn't have to end the way it did." The officer shifts uncomfortably, the words landing heavier than he expected. But before he can respond, the sound of another car door slamming nearby pulls their attention. A second officer, younger and visibly tense, strides up quickly, hand already on his holster. "Everything all right here?" The newcomer asks, eyes darting from the judge to his colleague. "Stand down," the first officer says, raising a hand. "It's fine." But the younger cop isn't convinced. "I got a call about a suspicious person. Is this him?" The judge's calm demeanor doesn't falter, but his gaze sharpens. "Another assumption," he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. The stakes suddenly feel higher. The situation teeters on the edge of spiraling out of control. The younger officer's hand hovers near his weapon, tension tightening every muscle in his body. The judge stands still, his eyes calm but watchful, the weight of the moment settling into the pit of his chest. The older officer places a firm hand on his partner's arm, shaking his head. "Put your hand down," he says quietly. "He's not a suspect." Confusion flickers across the young officer's face. Then why was he stopped? The silence hangs heavy, the answer painfully obvious but unspoken. The judge's eyes never leave the first officer's face. There's no anger now, only a quiet, measured truth waiting to be acknowledged. The older cop exhales deeply, his pride giving way to something far more important: accountability. His voice softens. "Because I assumed, and I was wrong." For a moment, the street is filled only with the hum of passing cars and the buzz of distant streetlights. Finally, the judge speaks, his words cutting through the quiet like a gavel striking wood. "It's not too late to learn from this," he says, "but next time someone might not walk away unharmed." The younger officer lowers his gaze, his hand slipping from his holster. The older cop looks the judge in the eye, regret written clearly on his face. "I'm sorry," he says. The judge nods, a small but powerful gesture. Then, without another word, he turns, gets into his car, and drives away. The two officers are left standing in the glow of their patrol car's lights. One moment of bias, now a lesson neither will ever forget. As the judge's car disappears into the night, the older officer remains still, the weight of his mistake pressing on his shoulders. The flashing lights from the patrol car feel harsher now, casting sharp shadows that mirror the consequences of a moment driven by assumption rather than reason. The younger officer breaks the silence. "That was a judge." His voice carries disbelief, tinged with embarrassment. "Yes," the older cop responds quietly, "and he shouldn't have had to explain who he was." The younger man glances at his partner, a flicker of realization dawning. "We were wrong." The first officer nods slowly. "It's not about who he is. It's about how we see people before we know anything about them." For a while, neither speaks. The hum of the radio inside the patrol car seems distant now, the street suddenly quieter. The older officer thinks of the countless other faces he's passed, judgments made in a split second. He wonders how many of them he'll never have a chance to make right. As they finally climb back into their car, he reaches for the radio and turns it off. Some lessons come too late. But tonight, at least, change has begun with a single, humbling truth. Justice starts with seeing people for who they truly are.